So we're living in an officially post-ban world for Standard in Magic the Gathering. But a lot of you might not have a deck to play anymore because some very powerful cards got banned out of it. Well, that's the point of this video. I'm going to be talking about 4 decks that existed pre-bannings and will continue to exist post-bannings because not too many cards are getting hit in the decks themselves, and also decks that'll continue to live post-rotation come Edge of Eternities, which will happen in about a month or two from the time this video goes live. But yeah, these are the 4 decks I'm going to be talking about. Mono Black, Dimir, Delirium, specifically the Gruul variety, and Jeskai Oculus. I'll top right into things. Gruul Delirium is a pretty good deck. It's a pretty fast deck. If you're an aggro player who's looking for a new deck to try and toy around with and play with, this deck's pretty good. Delirium's a pretty simple concept. You want one of each type of card into your graveyard, which is why this deck runs cards like Patchwork Beastie, and Wildfire Wickerfolk, and Fear of Missing Out. They are creatures that are also artifacts, or creatures that are also enchantments, so that helps towards your Delirium count pretty heavily. You also got stuff like Breakout and Bushwhack, which help pretty well with that too, and then Terza can just discard those cards from your hand, making this a pretty solid deck overall for all you aggro heads. Now, if you're the type of person who cares about what's going to happen to this deck post-rotation, you are losing some cards. Copperline Gorge and Karpaloosan Forest are the biggest hits and your fastest lands in the deck. However, Karpaloosan Forest can be easily replaced with a Starting Town. In case you don't know what Starting Town is, let's just pull it up right now. It is, in fact, one of the better lands to come out of Final Fantasy. Enters tapped unless it's your first, second, or third turn of the game. You can tap for colorless always, or you can pay a life and add 1 mana of any color. It's basically the exact same as Karpaloosan Forest, except it says Town on it, which Seeds of Hope is also rotating. Seeds of Hope is one of your best turn 1 plays in this deck because it fills your graveyard with 3 types of things, and then you can potentially 3 types of things. Apologies. You won't always hit 2 different things off of Seeds of Hope to fill up your graveyard with instant and then potentially like creature and sorcery. But it's possible. However, Town Greeter is a pretty solid replacement, especially if you're switching to Starting Town. Town Greeter is a 2-drop that enters and mills 4. It's a 1/1 body, meaning it can be a solid chump blocker against some decks. Milling 4 fills up your graveyard pretty heavily, and then you can grab a land card, which is good if you're missing land drops. But if it's a town, you happen to gain 2 life, so there's some just solid synergy already with replacement cards that you can find. These other cards over here are just other cards that are good for the deck that I thought I would show off in the video. Drag to the Roots is good if you want to splash into Jund, but that's a different conversation. Copperline Gorge being missing come Edge of Eternities will kind of hurt, but we're getting Stomping Grounds, which makes Thornspire Verge even better. So you're not really even missing that much because Shocklands are really freaking good. Dimir Midrange is a deck that didn't get hit at all by the bannings. Nothing in this deck that was typically run was banned out, so the deck is just as powerful as it always was, and in fact, some might even say better. I personally think that the deck's in an even better position than it was before because while it was really good at dealing with the aggro and mid-range decks of the meta that kind of floated around, it was exceptionally good at being the beatdown, at being the aggressive one, using Kaido and Enduring Curiosity to take people out of the game. This is a really solid deck that you might want to consider swapping to if you were an Izzet player. It's not as fast, but it plays pretty similarly in that you are controlling the flow of the game, and you are the one swinging in with the creatures. This deck will be getting hit a little hard come rotation time in August. That deck will be losing Dark Slick Shores and Underground River. However, just like the Gruul Delirium deck, you are getting the ability to run Starting Town in place of, say, Underground River, and you're getting Shocklands, which will make your Gloomlake Verge even better, meaning that those cards are basically a wash because you are taking out 2 lands and putting in 2 lands that are serving very similar purposes. In terms of actual cards that are not rotation proof, it can be kind of rough. Cut Down going away from Standard will be a pretty big hit to the black tempo playing decks. However, there will probably be replacements that'll be pretty good. Caustic Exile, if there becomes like a blue-black dragon version of this deck, I doubt it, but it's still worth keeping in mind. Stab is a pretty good, like, I just need something to kill those 1/1s, 2/1s of the other decks pretty quickly. And Nowhere to Run as a 2-drop is pretty okay as well. Anoint with Affliction and Go for the Throat will also be rotating out, which will suck for the deck. However, Bitter Triumph is staying around, and Bitter Triumph is a pretty powerful removal spell. It basically trades the lack of life loss from Go for the Throat to the ability to hit Planeswalkers, which can be pretty useful, as I think the meta is going to slow down a lot now that aggro's gotten hit pretty hard with some bannings. Overall, I think this deck's in a great place if you really like that mid-rangey style. Someone who played maybe a Beans deck would also probably appreciate this, as once you get, say, a Kaido or an Enduring Curiosity out onto the battlefield, you are hitting just as fast as ever, but you are just drawing cards in the meantime. The deck's good. I would worry a tiny bit about what removal spells you might slot in post-rotation, but overall, I think this deck's going to stay great and be great. Jeskai Oculus is one of the decks I think is positioned really well right now. I think that it has a lot of room to grow and a lot of room to change and adapt because it's a deck that can kind of run some silver bullets, considering how much card draw and discard it has and how its basic game plan in game one is quite simple. Find a way to put a Boron Oculus in the graveyard and cast Helping Hand on it in order to overpower your opponent with lots of 2/2s. That doesn't mean that the deck is flawless or solved or anything like that. I think the deck actually has a lot of potential to grow and change and adapt. I just think that the Oculus shell is really strong right now, and for all of you Omniscience players, this might be a way for you to use a lot of your similar old cards, or maybe even just similar old playstyles, and just switch to a more aggro deck. To be fair, Omniscience combos and going away, I've already seen quite a few lists out there that are trying to make it work, but that extra turn of slowness that the deck has by not being able to cast Abuelos on turn 4 seems to be hitting it pretty hard. Now, there's not really much post-rotation talk for this deck because most of these cards aren't rotating. The only things that in this deck that could rotate would be Pain lands and certain fast lands, but as you can see from my mana base right now, I've already started experimenting with how the deck will look without them. Starting Town is a great replacement for the Pain lands, even if it only covers half of the ones that are missing. But Spirebluff Canal and Inspiring Vantage aren't rotating. The Verges and Surveil lands aren't rotating. Specifically, Restless Anchorage isn't rotating as well, which is nice. And the deck's also going to be getting a shock land in Stomping Grounds, the red-white, which, in my opinion, and what I will probably end up doing come Stomping Grounds being a part of the meta, is I might drop some Inspiring Vantages to put in some more Verges. Drop the Inspiring Vantages to just do 4 shock lands and then be able to put in some more Verges, because Verges plus Shocklands means you're making all the mana colors, because this just needs a Plains, and this just needs a Mountain, and you know what's both of them? A Stomping Ground, that's right. I think this deck is really well positioned to be a good deck to learn right now, and then a good deck to play across the next year, or 2, depending on when the next rotation comes through. I'm not entirely sure. But I think this deck's in a great place if you want to learn a kind of potentially aggro slanted deck, because, you know, routing Mako into Profts into a Steamcore Scholar means this little guy has like 8 power on turn 3, or a slower, more tempo-y game using stuff like Get Lost, Torch the Tower, and Glacial Dragon Hunt, and then cheating out an Oculus with a Helping Hand later on. The deck's positioned really well. It's not losing anything, and I think it's got a lot of room to grow and evolve and potentially adapt to whatever comes out as the next best deck. Mono Black Midrange or Mono Black Demons, depending on which version you're playing, will be a pretty powerful deck come post-banning season here, because the deck was already performing pretty okay on Arena and in MTGO challenges. It was just kind of held back by basically having a really hard time being able to answer both Izzet Prowess and Mice Aggro, because you can't really answer both of them with this deck, because having enough hand hate to hit the Prowess deck, it's pretty hard to have enough removal to hit the Mouse deck at the same time. However, this version that you're seeing right in front of you will be a version of the deck you'll probably be seeing on the ladder a lot. A version running stuff like Cut Down, Go for the Throat, and Shieldred. Pretty popular, pretty powerful. Demon Wall is a pretty popular new addition to the deck as well, being a really solid 2-drop blocker who will turn on your Unholy Annex as soon as possible and make you start gaining life. Archfiend of the Dross is one of the bigger top-end threats of the deck, a 6/6 for 4. Powerful stuff. This, however, is how the deck might look post-rotation. Now, this is obviously just a haphazard throwing together of very similar cards, pulling in Speed Demon and Bloodletter to replace Shieldred, and then the Archfiend, pulling in Stab for Cut Down, Bitter Triumph for Go for the Throat, etc., etc., etc. But as you can tell, the core of the deck probably won't change. Unholy Annex and Demon Wall are sticking around, Cruel Claws Heist and Duress are staying around, Preacher and Carsey Revenant are staying around. Obviously, Unholy Annex is around, as is the Raceway and the Soulstone Sanctuary. Like, the deck's got a lot of potential to stay around post-rotation as well, because black removal spells, there's typically a lot of them. There's typically a lot of them printed, and they're typically quite strong, depending on how nice Wizards is feeling to the mono-black players. But I think this deck is going to be wonderful both post-bannings here and post-rotation, because simply, the deck's really resilient. It has really powerful answers to aggro threats with the Revenants and the Preachers as your 3-drop that'll start slowing stuff down. Demon Wall turning on Unholy Annex is a crazy addition to the deck, and Bloodletter making Annex ping your opponent for 4 each turn adds up pretty hard. I think this deck's going to be great and definitely something that you mid-range control players might want to take a look at, because it's really easy to just slam 4 copies of Duress and then even some stuff like Intimidation Tactics in here and Cruel Claw's Heist to both hand hate and steal cards if you need to. Deck's going to be great, it's going to be very linear and powerful, and the amount of card advantage out of Unholy Annex is going to be insane. That's the video. I just thought I'd talk about these decks a little bit, talk a little bit about them post-ban, a little bit about them post-rotation. I'm recording this very speedily and very early to try and put my thoughts on what decks might survive and be pretty powerful out there. If these decks don't stick with it and don't stay strong, oh well. I still think they're cool decks. I think they're decks that are worth you trying. Decks that are worth your wild cards. Maybe not worth your money, depending on the deck. I know that the mono black demons with Bloodletter of Aclazotz. I think Aclazotz is a very expensive card at the moment, but who knows? I overall think that all of these are really cool options and really cool things for you to try out, and things that you might want to build and put together to just kind of keep playing the deck that'll survive a post-rotation and a post-ban world. Stuff that is very forward-thinking, as opposed to the numerous number of Zur Leyline Binding decks I'm seeing on the ladder at the moment, in which case those decks are losing both of those cards, which makes it much harder for them to exist in a post-rotation world. But either way, thanks for hanging out and watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that stuff. And I hope to catch you in the next one.